Okay, I'm sorry. That clip was supposed to play. That was Mark Carney saying we have to earn our freedom. I have no idea why it's not playing. I'm just going to ensure we got something to play here. Okay, I'm going to have to come back in here. I'm sorry. We'll try again here. I have no idea why. None of these clips are playing.
The Prime Minister lied and his minions continue to lie.
We need political change. But we also need to resolve to resist. Okay, so I'm just going to ensure we've actually got some clips that are working today. Once again, we're having internet problems. Sorry, I'm going to have to come back in half an hour, folks. Sorry about this, but nothing is working today.
Members of the House of Commons, it is with a deep sense of pride and pleasure that my wife and I join you here today as we witness Canadians coming together in a renewed sense of national pride, unity, and hope. I would like to acknowledge that we are gathered on the unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. This land acknowledgement is a recognition of shared history as a nation, while continuing to deepen my own understanding. It is my great hope that in each of your communities and collectively as a country, a path is found toward truth and reconciliation in both word and deed.
Now, this is one of the dumbest things any monarch could ever say at a speech from the throne. I know it's become commonplace to repeat this as a preface, whether you're at a parliamentary committee or a Rotary Club. We want to acknowledge we are on the unceded territories. It's nonsense. They were ceded. Let's be realistic about this. These territories were ceded. And to say they weren't ceded means this is an illegitimate country. This means we're not a country. It's null and void. And for a king, a head of state, to make that comment at a throne speech is absolutely nuts. But that's what we're dealing with this Carney government. This is going to be a backroom government. And I didn't intend to show that at the beginning, but it seems to be the only clip that's working right now. But what am I talking about when I say a backroom government? Well, you're going to see two kinds of government. You're going to see this. A lot of people didn't even know the World Health Organization pandemic agreement was passed. Canada automatically became a signatory to this treaty without a protest, without a vote, without anybody raising the issue in the House of Commons. Because actually, at the time, the House of Commons wasn't even sitting. So that's what I mean by backroom government. This is a perfect example of. Did you hear any protest from the Conservative Party about this? I ask you that. Did you hear any protest from the Conservative Party about this? No, you didn't. And this is what concerns me. Conservative, it's extremely worrisome. Do you remember the feisty Pierre Poilievre who used to taunt the Trudeau government for being so out of touch with ordinary Canadians? Do you remember how the Conservative Party of Canada used to be certain that there was a bifurcation between conservatives and liberals? It had something to do with freedom, didn't it? Something to do with how the Trudeau liberals were systematically taking that freedom away, eliminating free speech and telling us how to raise our children. Pierre Poilievre used to talk about wanting to represent a mind your own business party. Remember that? Well, you won't hear much opposition right now from the man who is waiting to be the official opposition leader again after a by-election. Actually, it is difficult to discern too much difference between the talking points offered by Prime Minister Mark Carney and Pierre Poilievre, who has stated categorically on several occasions that the Conservative Party of Canada intends to work with the government, especially as it concerns the on-again, off-again fight with President Donald Trump. Now, the other day, I compared the two speeches from caucus. First, from Mark Carney. The second, of course, from Pierre Poilievre. But here's what's happening, folks. Here's what's really happening. Poilievre has been told to cooperate with, but not to be co-opted by, the Carney government. Its agenda just seems to blend too well with that of the CPC. The Conservative leader has also been given the usual lecture following an electoral defeat. Move to the left, soften your positions, look more compromising. Be more like Ontario Premier Doug Ford. Poilievre can talk about Carney's double talk over tariffs and Trump, but suddenly Poilievre is no longer characterizing Carney as a danger to Canadian freedom. And Carney is a danger to Canadian freedom. Carney is moving towards a military alliance with the European Union. Right there. That seems to be intent on starting a war with Russia that will inevitably escalate into a nuclear conflict. Carney will move against free speech and introduce another Online Harms Act to make Canadians safe from misinformation, disinformation, and anything the government deems to be dangerous speech. The Medical Assistance in Dying program, MAID, is moving forward to include children. And Carney might be talking about rebuilding the Canadian Armed Forces, but you can bet billions of dollars of that and subsequent equipment will go to Ukraine and Europe and the EU. Carney talks about affordable housing, but if he can find a way to personally profit from this venture, you bet he will. And the product will be less than desirable. They had affordable housing in the Soviet Union. The problem was sometimes you had to live with 3 or 4 other families, and you never owned anything. But of course, that's what the WEF is talking about. You won't own anything. And you want safe streets? How about nobody being allowed on the streets because we're under another lockdown because of a crisis? Canada's already approved the World Health Organization's pandemic treaty. Not a word of protest from the Carney government and nothing from the Poilievre people either. That was an ominous sign. The Conservatives are not prepared to push the envelope in this parliament and are waiting and hoping that they will miraculously form government even as they accommodate Carney's administration. So these are very, very dangerous times. I'm going to see if I can. There's an update, of course, to the Ostrich story, which so many of you thought was unimportant, and I'm still at a loss to figure that out. Why you thought the freedom and the property rights of a BC farmer weren't important enough to talk about. I think they were, and I think they are. But look at this, because we had media, new media, from not just myself, but from Rebel News, and independent media were there, but even the mainstream media was reporting on this. And because U.S. Health and Human Services Secretary Robert Kennedy Jr. intervened by telling the Canadian Food Inspection Agency to get real. really use science. Stop pretending that you don't need science. And that's what made the difference here. So the ag minister is actually thinking about reversing the policy. This is something to celebrate. We don't get a lot to celebrate in this country, believe me. And there you go. No. I'm going to try to see if we can play this again. For some reason, this clip does not want to play. I don't know why. Here, listen.
To get things done, he's certainly not in a hurry to do it. These things are going to take a long time, even if he acts immediately. And he's talking about waiting till fall before any legislation will be passed. And he's only going in half measures. So I'll give you an example. The most direct path for a pipeline to Tidewater is to Northwest BC, but there's a tanker ban in the law. So nobody is going to start planning to build a pipeline west as long as that ban is in place. So he's got to get rid of that ban, or else we will not have a pipeline to the west coast. So where is he going to send it then? Is he going to send it up to the Arctic, to Hudson's Bay, through Quebec to New Brunswick? Well, he won't say. Yesterday, he didn't mention oil, gas, or pipelines once. Look, if you want to get things built, you need to pass very tangible changes. Very simple. You have to get rid of the industrial carbon tax, the energy cap, the West Coast shipping ban, C-69. That is how we're going to get things built. We need to unlock our incredible resources so that our trades workers get $200,000 a year jobs that will make them all better off. That's what we want. And we can be independent and self-reliant from the Americans.
I would like to welcome the Prime Minister to his.
And we'll get to this one in a second here, but now Poilievre is definitely fighting back on some of the key points, and that's of course what he needs to do. But the overall picture is a very timid approach to the Carney government because it appears to be talking the same language as the Conservatives, but it's not. You know, I've said this repeatedly. Conservatives and liberals can talk about the same subject matter, but it can mean very different things. So when Mark Carney talks about affordable housing, he's not talking about the single family home for hardworking Canadians. He's talking about Soviet-style block housing. That's what Mark Carney is talking about. And if that's your vision for Canada, well, Mark Carney can deliver this. But increasingly, we are going to see the Mark Carney on display in the House of Commons, which, as we know, was exactly like Justin Trudeau. And unfortunately, I lost my four minutes of question period clips I was going to show you. I have something that's almost as good. But Mark Carney was there for, what, 5 questions, and he left yesterday? Who does that remind you of? Didn't we say that Mark Carney was going to be Justin Trudeau 2.0? Didn't we say that Justin Trudeau was just like Mark Carney and vice versa? And of course they are. So how is Mark Carney going to get away with his swindle? And this is what this is. He swindled the Canadian voters during the election campaign by pretending Donald Trump was a visceral enemy of Canada, that the US was suddenly our enemy and we were going to move forward in a totally different direction. But he was just kidding. He was in communication with Donald Trump, and Donald Trump endorsed Mark Carney on 3 separate occasions. Count them. 3 separate occasions, including on election day. So it was all a charade. He sold Canadians a bill of goods, pretending that this was a most consequential election in our history because we were almost at war with the United States. Remember that crazy talk? That's how Mark Carney talked. And that was the public Mark Carney fighting the election. Privately, he was on the phone with Donald Trump, and he was telling Donald Trump, we're not going to do the counter tariffs. And that's, of course, how he got away with all of this. And so I'm going to go to question period here. And this is actually a pretty good moment for Andrew Scheer. And I've known Andrew Scheer long before he was Speaker, and actually before he was even elected to the House of Commons. Andrew's a pretty good guy. He's a social conservative who seems uncomfortable with that sometimes, but at least he's a social conservative. And he's pretty good in the House of Commons. He understands the business of the House very well. And I think his initial question here to Mark Carney is quite effective.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I would like to welcome the Prime Minister to his first official question period. This is where democracy lives, and this is where we provide rigorous scrutiny on every word he says and every dollar he spends on behalf of Canadians. Now, let's talk about those words and dollars. During the election campaign, it was elbows up as he put retaliatory tariffs on the U.S. Then secretly, he dropped those tariffs to effectively zero. But he didn't stop there. He told Canadians that the government would collect $20 billion in revenue from those tariffs and use it to cost his platform. Now that those tariffs are going to bring in $0, two quick questions. Why wasn't he honest with Canadians during the election? And how's he going to make up the shortfall? Is he going to borrow it, print it, or tax it?
The right honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, may I first thank my constituents from Nepean for giving me the honour of being here. And could you also indulge me to say how great it is to see you in the Speaker's chair, and I trust that you're operating under the period of grace that will not be accorded to me. Appropriately, as the Leader of the Opposition just said. Mr. Speaker, our tariffs have maximum impact on the United States, minimum impact on Canada, and we are dedicating all the revenues from those tariffs to supporting the workers and businesses affected by the unjustified American actions. Hear, hear.
Okay, what money is he talking about here? Because once again, this is magic money. This is a government that's operating without any parliamentary approval. It's spending money without any parliamentary approval. Now, I've got a slide in a minute that illustrates this. But how does he intend to operate? Publicly, Mark Carney is for reduced government spending. He's for fewer government workers. He's for safer streets. He's for a stronger national defense. He's for a stronger, more vigorous border. He's for tougher penalties for criminals. He wants to get tough on crime too. Doesn't that sound like Pierre Poilievre's agenda during the election campaign? How does he intend to pay for any of these policies, though? He doesn't have a clue. Because this is the public Mark Carney. Behind the scenes, Mark Carney is spending your money. Behind the scenes, Mark Carney is ensuring we are part of the WHO pandemic agreement. Behind the scenes, Mark Carney is working towards a European defense plan. Behind the scenes, Mark Carney is working towards globalism. Publicly, he's all for the same things Pierre Poilievre's for. Behind the scenes, in the back rooms, he's working against Canada.
The honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Well, he didn't take long to pick up old Liberal habits of not being able to answer questions. But since the election, Canadians have been inundated with grand rhetoric and pretty speeches from this Liberal Party, but they are still suffering under all those policies. Household debt up at record levels, number of people who can't pay their mortgages increasing, food bank use continuing to rise. Now TD Bank is forecasting a recession with hundreds of thousands of lost jobs. The PM said undoing the damage of the last 10 years would require great speed, but he's not going to table a budget for 6 months. If he's the man with the plan and the guy you hire in a crisis, why won't he table a budget before he goes on summer vacation?
Answer: he has no intention of tabling a budget. And this is how bad it gets. See this? Carney government tables $486 billion spending plan with few details. And if you have a look at the story, you'll discover that there's very little of the actual spending promised during the election campaign is factored into this spending plan. So it's probably going to be about double this. And once again, we have a Mark Carney who publicly says he wants to spend less money, but who's going to be spending about the same as the Trudeau government. We have a Mark Carney who publicly says he wants to get tough on crime. Do you think he's actually going to move on bail conditions? Do you think he's going to get tougher on crime? Do you think he's going to make the streets safer? Yes, he'll make the streets safer by locking them down. Because he's already warned us during the Liberal leadership campaign, that he intends to use the full force of government, to use emergency powers to enforce his policies. So there's two Mark Carneys, isn't there? There's the Mark Carney you see publicly now for maybe 3 days in the House of Commons. You'll see the Mark Carney publicly continue to talk about affordable housing, safer streets, bolstering national defense, securing the border. He'll talk about those things publicly, but behind closed doors, he's going to continue to work for the globalist agenda, and this is what he's doing. But what's most disturbing to me about this WHO pandemic treaty, and I'll show it again. This is chilling. We have given our sovereignty over to the United Nations in terms of pandemics now. So the United Nations can now tell Canada, you're in a pandemic. You must lock down. People must mask. Keep 6 feet away from each other. And people have to receive the vaccination or else. These are vaccination passports on the way. This is Mark Carney's agenda. Quietly went through. And as I said, what is most concerning to me is not a peep, not a word of protest from the Conservative Party of Canada. And I told you, when I tried to address this issue over a year ago, I tried to talk to MP Leslyn Lewis, and I was told she could not talk to me about the WHO pandemic treaty or anything else, because they don't want to talk about these issues. They don't want to seem too conspiratorial, even though we have learned so much more about the pandemic in the last 2 years. We still are being silenced. And so are Conservative MPs, and the Conservatives don't want to go there. Don't talk about globalism. We don't want to talk about the WEF. No, we can't touch that. This is an interesting clip here.
To come back to the throne speech, will you support it? And do you like what's in it, please?
I didn't see it in English, so I will indulge you. Okay, it is the most important initiative by a federal government towards centralization that I have seen or heard of. I do not believe it is ill-intended. I believe that Mr. Carney sees himself culturally as the CEO of Canada, and he will make decisions, and he will have his decisions being implemented by everybody, and he seems to see that Quebec and provinces are merely region offices. And I'm not mad at him now, and I intend not to be. It is the way it works where he comes from. This is not the way it works in this place, and it is not the way it works within this federation, as terrible as it might be for us. So my plan is to do what I promised to do during the campaign when we started going up again. We will meet next week. We will discuss in complete serenity, and we will try, and I will try to find common grounds in order to work together, because the issue at the beginning of the campaign was the threat from Donald Trump. And in the speech, there's no such thing. It just vanished, disappeared. So we have to make it what it's supposed to be, adaptation for Quebec and Canada facing the threat from Mr. Trump.
My French colleagues were asking about, I believe, if I translate it right in my head, that you won't try to drop the government?
This is not the way I think about it at this point. The balance of power that we do hold is not in the chamber, because with the support of 3 NDP MPs, they could have this speech go through. Maybe the Conservatives, I don't know. In the committees, most of them, almost all of them, we hold the balance of power, because if Liberals and Conservatives are not in agreement, the vote that will make the difference is ours. So as many things as possible that would have to go through committees will command negotiation with the Bloc Québécois. This is why I said that we have more influence with 22 MPs than we had with 33.
Something you earn every day, and that strength is something we need to reinforce.
But how do you
Play that again, because it's incredible.
But freedom is something you earn every day, and that strength is something we need to reinforce.
But how do you
Yeah, for some reason I couldn't play that at the beginning of the show. I wanted you guys to hear that. That's the private Mark Carney making a public appearance. That's what Mark Carney really believes. We don't have a right to freedom. It's not a God-given right. It's not an inalienable right. It's something we have to earn from the state. And once again, if you really want to know who Mark Carney is, read his book, Values. I'll be back in a minute to explain what I mean by that. Yeah, please visit our store. There's some great merchandise there. I don't show that ad often enough. I probably should show it more, because I'm proud of the material we have there. I'm proud of the merchandise. And, I should wear some of it on the show more often, because a lot of people say, if you like it so much, wear it. And I should do that. So what do I mean by read Mark Carney's book, Values? Read his book, Values. And do people change overnight? No, they change, or they appear to change, if it's politically suitable. Mark Carney has done a huge transformation of the Mark Carney persona in the last 5 months. Because this is not a man who believes in small c conservative principles. He does not believe in small government. He does not think the government should get out of your life. He does not think the government should be a mind your own business government that doesn't tell you how to raise your children. He does not think it should be a government that doesn't try to control how you use energy, how much heat you use, when you put the air conditioning on. Mark Carney is the exact opposite of this. He is a statist. And if you read Values, you will discover that Mark Carney says the political figures he most admires are Karl Marx and Vladimir Lenin, both of them criminals. intellectual criminals, in Lenin's case, a literal criminal who killed many, probably up to 500,000 people died as a result of Lenin. That was just a precursor for what was to come under Joseph Stalin. But that's who Mark Carney still is. And don't be deceived by all of this sudden talk about he wants affordable housing and safe streets and tougher penalties for car thieves, and on it goes. Now, some of you might say I'm being too alarmist about the Conservative Party being co-opted by the Liberals. You might think I'm being a little too severe or extreme in my concern that we're seeing the Uniparty. But I don't think so. Unless we continue to be diligent and vigilant against that happening, it will happen. And some might already argue it's already happened. There are very few differences between these two parties. And as the parliament proceeds, it looks like there's fewer and fewer differences as the Conservative Party wants to work with the Liberal government. So is that the Uniparty or is that not the Uniparty? This democracy is not about everybody singing off of the same page. Democracy is about differences. It's about having a difference of opinion. It's about being allowed to have a difference of opinion and being allowed the free speech to articulate that difference of opinion. That's not what we're seeing in this parliament right now. When everybody's happily working together, democracy dies in the process. And believe me, who do you think will win? Who do you think gets the advantage when another party is co-opted? The government gets the advantage, just as it did with the NDP. As I said, Jagmeet Singh, why did he collaborate as a de facto partner with Justin Trudeau? Well, I got one or two policies advanced, didn't I? I got one or two of my policies through Parliament. And what was the result of that? The NDP was virtually annihilated in the last election, and Jagmeet Singh was personally defeated in his own riding, coming in third. That's the result of being co-opted by a government. The Conservatives have to be very, very careful that they remain an official opposition, but not only that, that their ideology can be seen as different than the Liberals. And I know Poilievre's under intense pressure right now to be more like a Liberal, to be more soft, to be more accommodating, to be more moderate, to be more like the CBC and Doug Ford. But it's a recipe for disaster for this party, especially as the forces of separation are rising in Alberta, and potentially that province is going to be leaving as an independent state because they're fed up with the game that goes on in Ottawa. They're fed up with this politics. They're fed up with what's happening in the House of Commons, and they're fed up with a lack of real choice. So I'm going to leave it there for now. I'm sorry for the technical difficulties. I tell you, we're being targeted every day by people out there who don't want this station on the air, but we're fighting back. Thank you for your support. Please share the station with your friends and family. Be a subscriber. We need your support to continue the fight. And I thank you for that support. And I'll be back again tomorrow at 10 o'clock. Godspeed to all of you. I've been doing this live from Ottawa, and I'm David Krayden.